Welcome to The Brief with Karen McDonald. I'm Karen McDonald. I'm the Oakland County Prosecutor, and I'm also a candidate for Michigan Attorney General. Each episode of this podcast will be interviewing friends, colleagues, victims of crime, law enforcement, advocates, anyone actually who's interested in making the lives of the people in Michigan better. I'm honored today to welcome my very first guest, Kym Worthy. Kym Worthy is the Wayne County Prosecutor since 2004. She's also a former judge and a former assistant prosecutor. And not only is she somebody who's been critical for victims in Wayne County and served as a role model for people all over the state and country, she's also a good friend and has helped me quite a bit and many, many other prosecutors across the state. Welcome, Kym.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. I feel important because I get to be the first guest.
You are important outside of being the first guest. In fact, I think it's difficult to do an introduction for Kym. And I can't say enough about how wonderful Kym is as a leader, but also a great mentor and a great example for young women everywhere and not so young, including me. But I will try to do a little bit of your intro. She has been the Wayne County Prosecutor since 2004 and has taken on some of the cases in the state, from prosecuting public corruption cases to tackling violent crime and also leading to groundbreaking reforms in the justice system. That is absolutely not a good description of your background, Kym, because I missed something that I think is really important, and that is how you started out.
You know, I think what a lot of people don't know is I'm a daughter of an Army colonel, and my father was the 20th or 21st or 22nd person of color to graduate from West Point, the first from the state of Michigan. That's important because he taught me my ethics, my value, my morals, my self-worth. And he made me believe, even though my mother was a stay-at-home mom, she had a master's degree and she was a stay-at-home mom, but my parents made me feel like I could do anything. And I believe that. And so my goals were always very, very high and lofty. I actually didn't ever think I would meet my goals. Wanted to be a judge for a long time. Wanted to be, actually, surprisingly, I wanted to be a First Amendment lawyer. And I kind of fell into the prosecutor's office because I was looking for a job. John O'Hare, the new prosecutor at the time, wanted to diversify his staff and was looking for talented and people that would be interested. And I was just a young person out of law school. I was very hesitant about taking the job at first because I had a stereotypical view of what prosecutors did. Lock people of color up, throw away the key, no programming, just kind of rote, remote kind of prosecution. And I was wrong. Of course, it depends on who your leader is, but I was very, very wrong. And I found out one thing that was very important, that people of color want people to represent them on both sides of the aisle. Detroit at the time, and still does, has a very robust defense bar of color, but there were almost no prosecutors of color. And I think it's because people thought the way I thought at the time. But our citizens, our people who vote for us and put us in these offices, and I wasn't that way at the time, but they want to see equal representation as well. You know, so you have vast numbers of victims of color, children of color, and so you have a different perspective when you're a person of color getting this job. So that's kind of how I started. Found out that I was good at it. Found out that I enjoyed it. Found out that if you can enjoy what we do, but I mean, enjoy helping people and bringing, even though I hate this word, closure to people who have been victimized. And that's what I liked doing. And because every day when I went to work, and you know this, Karen, every day when I went to work,
I do.
I walked out the door knowing I'd helped someone. And I don't know how many, other than the medical profession, I don't really know any other profession, maybe teachers, that can say that every day.
Right. You know, and I actually started in the prosecutor's office and then left for a period of time and came back. But I always said this, and I still believe it, that being a prosecutor is the best job you can have as a lawyer. Now, you have to like being in court. You have to be like being litigator. But I totally agree. There is one thing you and I share, though, and which is a little unusual, in that we are both former judges.
Yep. You know, that's something I wanted to do ever since I was probably 6th grade. I didn't have any lawyers in my family. I had no role models. My father was, like I said, a West Point grad, an engineer, an Army career. My mother had a master's degree in library science and didn't work outside the home until I was in high school. So I had no really vision or understanding what a lawyer does. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And my parents didn't let me
Mhm.
watch TV, so it's not like I was watching legal shows on television.
Wow.
But I just knew innately that that's what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to be a judge one day. And so, when my work received some recognition, I knew that that was the time to step out, and that was after I had done the Butts and Nevers trial, the police beating trial back in the '90s, and
Mhm.
so I thought that was an opportune time. Ran against an incumbent and beat him 2-1, and I enjoyed my time on the bench. It's a great job for people who wanna do serious work and wanna do everything that they're supposed to do. Be there every day. You know, as you know, we have judges that come for the paycheck and are out the door at noon
Mhm.
and don't do everything they're supposed to do, but, you and I weren't those kind of judges, and it was a lot of work. There's one thing, as you know, recommending to a judge saying, I'm recommending that this, second-degree murderer, for example, go to prison for 20 to 40 years. But it's another when your words are going to pronounce that, and you are the one that is
That's
saying
right.
that. And so that was kind
Mhm.
of an interesting pill to swallow. Always something going on, always dealing with victims, but also, making sure that the defendant's rights are protected as well. That's probably the number one
Right.
job, even though prosecutors are supposed to do that too. But you have to make sure that everything's done on the up and up and done right, as humanly possible. So I did like it. I left the bench after almost 9 years to run for prosecutor because um, John O'Hare. No, I ran for prosecutor after Mike Duggan, the now mayor of Detroit, was the prosecutor for about a year or something, a very short period of time. Because frankly, I didn't like the way he was running the office. And so I knew that I was qualified to do the job. I had done it for 12 years. I had done hundreds of jury trials, maybe about 150 jury trials, untold numbers of waiver trials and motions as a practitioner, and presided over a lot of them too as a judge. And so that I knew that I had some distinct ideas about how the office should be run, how there should be, in my opinion, more fairness. There should be diversion programs and other things to give people second chances. And so I had some other kind of really odd ideas that are popular now, but they were not popular back then. And so I was lucky enough to be appointed when Mike Duggan left to go to the DMC to run the DMC. And then I've had, I don't know, untold a number of, I think I've had 10 elections now altogether, including my judicial time. So I liked it, but again, I thought that I could be more effective as being the gatekeeper for cases in Wayne County.
Yeah, it's just every time you and I talk and I learn a little bit more that I didn't know, I'm even more impressed. But I do wanna say that there's so many things that you've done, groundbreaking things, and we're gonna get to a really big part of that in a minute. But you and I got to know each other when I left the bench to run for prosecutor, and then the last 7 years, you've become so important to me, and it has nothing to do with all of those accomplishments. It's that, if I had one word to describe you, it would be fierce. And you have managed to do what I think is really difficult for women in the law or any leadership position to do, which is you listen first and often, but when you speak with intention and people listen. And when I say people, I mean all people. I mean all the men in the room. It doesn't matter what political persuasion you are so well revered, and then also just such a good
Well,
friend.
thank you. People listen to me except for my children, but other than that,
No, well, yeah. I mean, that is also we're both moms, and that is one of the ways we've really bonded. And yeah, I remember coming home from being a judge or whatever it is I'm doing. I could be on TV, and you walk into the house, and they only want to know what's for dinner. They do not care how important you might be to everyone else. So one of the things that you are really known for is getting the rape kits tested, and I'll let you sort of intro that because it really is it's just astounding. And then also how it led to your relationship with Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order. And look, if you don't know Karen McDonald, I get it. And maybe you don't know Kim Worthy, but you definitely know Olivia from Law and Order. And when you said law programs, watching TV, I mean, those weren't around when you and I were young, but I still, it has been, it's, she has really been a game changer, even though she's a fictional television character for prosecutors and anyone who prosecutes sexual assault cases, which is where I started out my career as prosecuting child sexual assault cases. So I'd love for you to talk a
Yeah,
little bit about
it
that.
was interesting because we were having a really, and still are, but we were having a really hard time here in Wayne County, and we were on our third major scandal or second major scandal, in just a little over a year, almost 2 years. And first, the prosecution of Detroit's mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, and then we had a crisis with our firearms results from our firearms examiners. We had to look at untold number of cases. And I'm sitting in my office, literally sitting in my office one day, and Rob Spada, who was one of my managers and who had done a lot of work in what I call now SVU, but it was called something else back then, and was very familiar with these kind of cases. And he came in because I had appointed him to find out what was going on in terms of Detroit's evidence. We had the crime line had closed because of the firearms scandal, and MSP, Michigan State Police, for those that don't know, took over all of the forensic work for the Detroit Police Department. And so they, rightfully so, came down to Detroit and they wanted to know if they had all the avenues of where Detroit stored their evidence. And we did not know in my office, and certainly I did not know, that there were other places besides the main property room where they were storing evidence. And we just didn't know that. And so there was an officer from DPD who took them to all these places, and they landed on this old warehouse. And Rob is there and he's looking around and he sees what he estimated to be about 10,000 untested rape kits. And I say untested because he could see the
Oh my
seals.
gosh.
There were birds flying around.
And
Yeah,
Kim, this was 2008, 2009. What
2009.
year was this?
2009.
Okay. And
And
then just so that our audience knows, our listeners, the collection of evidence has to follow a very
Mhm.
strict protocol of what we call the chain of
Right.
custody, or its credibility can be impugned. And so it has to be under seal, and we have to say where it was when we present it
Right.
in the trial.
Yeah, and
But
so
uh, I
fortunately,
am curious though, what was the warehouse? Is it owned by the city, or
I
did
think
you know you even had?
it's interesting. It was owned by the city. I didn't even know that that was I don't even think I had seen this warehouse. Maybe I'd seen it and just not, know what it was. But I certainly didn't know it as
Mhm.
someplace where Detroit Police Department was storing evidence. We had no idea. None of us had no idea. We were all familiar with the property room, which was at 1300 Bobian, the main police headquarters at the
Mhm.
time. But we had no idea. And so when he came into my office and I'm at my desk and he says, "Boss, you'll never believe what I just saw." And he said, "I saw what I'm estimating to be about 10,000 untested rape kits." And he knew that because the seal was still intact and all of that. And so I couldn't
Did he
believe.
say how far it went back? Like how
No,
long those
we
had
did
been
not know at the
accumulating?
time until we actually took possession of them and started inventorying them. Because at that time, none of it was computerized. DPD was still using, the old big journal that the pages were yellow to kind of keep tabs
Oh
on
my
where the
gosh.
evidence was. And so we later found out that there were 11,341. So he wasn't far off on his estimation. I could not believe it. I knew this was going to be a huge scandal because I was going to make it one. I wasn't gonna let it be, just go, unnoticed because a lot of, unfortunately, prosecutors, police officers, sheriffs across the country, we found out later, had also, found large numbers of rape kits and just ignored them, and some of them just destroyed them. And so
Ugh, and just so our listeners know, the rape kit would be somebody who's made a claim and accusation where they're investigating
Mhm,
a sexual assault, and they go to a specific medical professional and collect
mhm,
evidence from an exam, and it's stored.
right,
So those all represent
a victim.
potential
Yeah.
victim. Yeah.
And what I like to say is in Wayne County, we're fortunate enough to have our forensic nurses, and we have 5 locations where people can go to. I know in some more rural counties, they don't have that, and they do it at hospitals or clinics. But here in Wayne County, we have specialized professionals, forensic nurses who do the collection. And
Mhm.
they, it can be anywhere from a 4 to 10-hour exam, depending on the case, where basically, this is very simplistic, every orifice on the woman's body is examined, and pubic hair is plucked and all kinds of things are done. And this is right after a woman has been brutalized in the most intimate of ways. They're going through this exam. Not every rape victim, as you know, I'm trying to get away from saying rape. Every sexual assault victim, as you know, um, doesn't have a rape kit done, doesn't have a sexual assault
Right.
kit done. And some go through the process not even to be able to find their perpetrator or hold their perpetrator accountable. They want to know if they're pregnant. They want to know if they have a STD, sexually transmitted disease. And then sometimes later they'll change their mind. But the majority of people who have a
Right.
rape kit done are interested in finding out who the person is. And so,
And also, can you just tell us, Kim, how once tested, how does that lead to identifying
yeah,
suspects?
there are two main ways. And one is, and they made the collection, and we hope that the forensic scientists have enough genetic material to have a profile. And so we have the combined, I get this wrong every time, the combined DNA index CODIS system where
Hmm.
these samples are put into. If there's enough genetic material to make a sample, there's not always enough material to make a sample. And so there are two different kinds. This is what I say all the time, a case-to-case association where there's a hit uh, on another kit, genetic material that has been put there, but we don't know who did it. But we do know we have a serial rapist because the genetic sample from um, one woman matches a genetic sample from another, but we don't know who it is because that person themselves is not in CODIS. And then we have, of course, the direct hits where the person is in CODIS and we know exactly who did it. We know
And
exactly.
just
Yeah,
to give some
yeah.
information, how does some or the DNA gets into CODIS if somebody is, well, this is a little controversial, charged or convicted of a certain kind of
That's
crime.
one way.
So you'd
That's one
be,
way. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then right,
That's one way.
and then also that your DNA would be in CODIS if you're convicted and
Right.
you're in
Right.
MDOC. Yeah,
And so,
Michigan Department of
right.
Corrections, prison.
And so we
Right,
know that we don't have, the majority of our results were case to case, or in other words, we don't know who the person is. We consider it lucky when we know who the person had hits to a certain individual. But a lot of people think that because you have a CODIS hit, that's all you need. That's the case. It's just one piece of evidence that goes forward.
right. If only,
Yes,
right?
right.
If
One
only.
piece of evidence that helps, of course, the prosecution if the victim wants to go forward. And so to date, we have had, I think about almost 250 convictions from the 11,341. We have a lot of cases still under investigation. We had a lot of cases where the defendant and or the victim was now deceased because some of these cases went
Right.
back 40 years. And so,
So you had to contact victims who had probably put this way
yes.
behind them.
Hmm.
You have no idea where they are. They could be, out of state. They could be married with a whole
Hmm.
family. They could be, you said some were deceased. I can't even imagine what that's like. It's hard enough to sit with victims and support them through their what's happened to them, but to then have it stirred all up is I can't imagine what that must have been
A
like.
huge problem. And, but, first we had to go through all of these, look at all these kits, take the information on the outside of the kits, because usually they have the date that the sexual assault happened, the name of the victim, where it happened. And that's basically all the information on the outside of the kit. And so we had to actually go through all these Detroit police files when we could find them, these journal books. And it took us 9 months just to find out and get the information from each and every kit so that we could know what we had. But yes, we ended up later when we started investigating these cases and doing these cases, we had investigators that were, for the lack of a better word, embedded in my office because the research showed
Mhm.
that the victims usually did not want to deal with the police agency who ignored them for all those years. And so we had usually
Right.
retired detectives that came in, actually physically were in my office that were working on these cases. And so what we started to do is we would go knock on the, when we found out when the detectives found the person, if they were lucky to do that, because like I said, some cases went back 30 years. I think our oldest case that we prosecuted was 33 years, where the victim was
That's
a
amazing.
child at the time that it happened. I think she was like 9 years old or something like that, and she was a woman of like 43. Don't add up my math, but something like that. And so we found out later that we need to be very intentional about contacting people because, like you said, it could be someone that was just, for an example, a sex worker who now had turned their life or on drugs or alcohol, turned their life around, and now was married and had kids. So we wanted to be very intentional about how we approached them. We would knock on the door. We would ask to speak to the person. If the person came to the door, we would let them know why we were there, but we wouldn't go any further. We would just say that we had a rape kit backlog that we discovered, that your name is a part of these kits, this program, this project, and we wanted to talk to you. We would like to come.
Right, and I know Kim, you're kind of skipping over the part and how you were single-handedly responsible for making this happen. This isn't something that a prosecutor's office. You and I have the two largest prosecutors' offices in the state, but we still don't have the resources to suddenly take on
Right.
prosecuting, investigating, and testing thousands of rape kits. So I do want you to say how you made that happen, because
Yeah,
you're such a humble person. You don't mention this, but it's a big deal.
yeah, it's at that time, as you can probably recall, it cost anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 per kit to test at that time. Detroit
Wow.
didn't have any money. Wayne County at that time was experiencing issues as well. And Detroit was 4 years away from the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of the United States. So there was really no money there. People that I talked to were not interested in helping. They were asking me, it wasn't on your watch. Why do you care about that? Literally, people would say that. And to me, it didn't matter who was at the helm. You're accountable to your survivors, and you're accountable to the community, period, whether they were a part of this at
Right.
all. And I just thought it was a
And we haven't said this, Kim, because maybe it's not just, I think it's important to say, though probably obvious. While there are all these victims that were left, and we have no idea how they were treated, because we've learned a lot in the last 40 years of about how to treat victims in law enforcement. But these are also suspects who haven't been held
right,
accountable
exactly.
and then may have gone on to further sexually assault other
That's
women.
right. And it's interesting. We found out later another reason, and I've been saying this for time immemorial, and you've heard me say this in meetings, that when you are a white person and a crime happens to you, your case in your life has more value than if you're a person of color. And so one of the reasons why these were just swept under the rug by some African American police officers in an African American city at the time, mainly, um, we do know how some of them were treated because we saw case notes in some files. And so they were treated very
Hmm.
poorly and very disrespectfully. So when you have the
Hmm.
courage, when you're sexually assaulted, and then you have the courage to report it, because a lot of women, as you know, I'm saying women, but we had some men and some children. A lot of women don't
Right.
report because of the whole blame the victim scenario. When they do have the
Right.
courage to come forward and do that, and then be ignored and ridiculed by the police officers who take the don't believe
We're
them.
not believed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that's another whole layer of victim blaming. And so, but we had no money to test these kits. And I was determined to do three things. I was determined to get all the kits tested. I was determined to make sure there was some kind of a tracking system, because we know that when you order something from Amazon or wherever you order it from, and they can tell you at the time that you pay for it exactly when it's going to land on your doorstep. So if they can do that, why can't we trap a rate kit through one state? And then I also wanted to make sure we brought justice to these women. And so I conducted it like you conduct a political campaign. I knocked on doors. I uh, I had women that came forward to host parties. But I'm gonna tell you how that happened. I didn't take this to the press. I sent a letter to the police chief at the time and told them this was an issue and how outraged I was. And someone within DPD took that and gave it to someone who then gave it to the press. And the reason I know that, because there was
Hmm.
a DPD, I tell people all the time, it wasn't me, it was a DPD stamp on the letter.
Hmm.
And so Joe Swickard, who was a longtime reporter for the Detroit Free Press, picked it up and did a story, and then it blew up because everybody was outraged about how it happened. We had women calling my office wanting to when I told them we didn't have the money to get them tested. We did, little fundraisers and backyard parties, and people hosted parties where we would raise 5,000, 10,000, and most of these were suburban white women at the time. And so then
Yeah.
it just took off, and we had a lot of the Black organizations get involved. Some men got involved. This is over a period of years, and so we were able to raise money to get them tested. But at the same time, we were able to broker what I'm going to call a deal with the Michigan State Police to cut the dollars per kit to be tested to $490 from 1,200 to 1,500 to 490. And that's when the African American 490 movement was launched, AA 490. And then we had 100 Black women organizations raise money. And we had sororities and fraternities competing to.
And this was throughout the
Yeah.
country. It wasn't just in
This was
Michigan.
in Michigan, but
Yeah.
we actually ended up getting money from every single state in the United States and 9 foreign countries who, contributed
Wow.
money. And so we were
And I wanna pause here because you also won't say this, that and a lot of your other work, earned you an induction to the Michigan's Women's Hall of Fame in
Yeah, that was a
2018,
real
correct?
honor and a real surprise, and mainly because of the work that we did with, Michigan Women Forward. It used to be, I can't even think of the name now, but that's Michigan Women's Forward who worked with us. Um, and then we had a number of nonprofits work for us, and so we had a lot of people working for us. Governor Schneider, who was the governor at the time, he, and the legislature, I'll tell you how that happened. That's how I met Mariska. The legislature passed, a bill to give $4 million to the Michigan State Police to test these kits. And then there were other private labs. And so,
Which is no easy
yeah.
feat, these getting something passed in the legislature. That's just that is a project all in and of
Well, I'll
itself.
tell you how that happened. It happened this way. When I was, John Conyers, may he rest in peace, called me out of the blue one day at the very beginning of this and said, Kim, I hear that you're working on this. You're trying to raise money you're working on the rate. Because I said, yes, this is probably 2 years in. And he said, I want you to come to Washington and testify. I said, sure.
Wow.
And I said, well, when do you want me to come, Congressman? And he said, tomorrow. I'm like, it was like 6 o'clock at night. I
Yeah.
don't know why I answered my phone. And so I said, okay, I'll get there. And so I got there, we testified. And as you can imagine, it was just like you see on TV where you have a table in front with people who are going to testify in front and you're facing the Congress people who are going to be asking questions. And I was on
Mhm.
the end. There was a sexual assault survivor from, I believe, Illinois, I think, was there. And then Mariska Hargitay was sitting next to her. And
Wow. So when you went, did you know you were
no, I
gonna
had
meet
no
Olivia
idea. No
Benson?
idea she was gonna be there. Um,
Oh
and,
gosh.
she testified, I testified, the sexual about survivor testified, and as we were breaking up, I said, "You gotta come to Detroit and help us because, this is the problem
Wow.
that we're experiencing." And she said, "I will." And I said, "Oh, yeah, right." But she did.
Mhm.
And she came,
Mhm.
she came a number of times, but the first time she came, we arranged and I worked with a group of young people that younger than me, of 25, 30-year-olds who, you know, made sure that this event happened. We had it at the Rooster Tail. We had like a fundraiser
Mhm.
that day, and she came and shook hands and took pictures with everybody that was there. And the next day, we had a breakfast at the Rooster Tail, and she came and spoke, and just about every legislator was there, and she shook hands and took pictures with all of them, and even ones that never returned my calls. So, I believe,
Yeah.
and I tell her all the time, that's the reason why this legislation passed through the Michigan legislature so fast. And I believe that.
Mhm.
So
And
that's how
you've now become good friends with her, and I know you've told me privately she's just a wonderful
she
person.
is. She really is.
Yeah.
She's great. She's down to earth. She's wonderful, and I work with her. Her foundation, Joyful Heart, who is dedicated to finding justice for sexual assault victims, domestic violence victims, child abuse victims, and now we're looking at other areas too that we can be effective. And they made their platform for many years the eradication of untested rape kits. And so, yeah,
Wow. Kim, I gotta ask you, first of all, I'm just curious, when you met, Mariska Hargitay, were you a Law& and Order fan?
yes, I was. I didn't watch it all the time, but yes, I was a fan. I thought
Mhm.
that the show,
Because I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
I was
sorry.
a fan. I didn't watch it every day, and I make sure I watch it all the time now, but I didn't watch it every day.
Mhm.
Certainly knew who she was and how important she was, and I didn't know until later how dedicated she was to these. I didn't know she was involved with these issues. And so, that's something that has been very meaningful and wouldn't have been as far as we are, now if it wasn't for a Joyful Heart, her foundation.
Right, and just I know you'll agree with me, I think throughout the years of my career when I started out as a prosecutor, um, always a big fan of Law& and Order. It's harder for me to watch it when this is the kind of work I'm doing because it feels so similar to what
Mhm.
what I do every day. But the one thing that I hope she's aware of, you know, it's one thing for us to tell juries this is what sexual assault victims appear like, which is actually the whole point is they don't all appear the same. Our expectations about how a victim should act and think and what they should be doing are not consistent with what reality is. But the show really has educated the American TV audience about what sexual assault looks like. We have so many instances where we have late reports, much late reports. We have instances, for instance, with some of the Larry Nassar victims. Um, and one of those people actually is an assistant prosecutor in my office, and we've talked extensively about this, who maintained for years she was not a victim. So some of the people, the victims from these sexual assaults and the rape kits, some of those women and uh, some men have actually psychologically kind of convinced themselves this did not happen to me. And there's all sorts of psychological reasons why people do that, but the show has tackled so many of those really important myths that people have about
Yeah,
victims.
sometimes I feel she's more knowledgeable than I am, and so she does recognize all of that, and the show is, I think, the Law& and Order franchise is among the most realistic that you'll see when you
I couldn't agree
and,
more. When people ask me about my job, is it like Law and Order? I always say,
yeah,
yes, it
a lot of it
is.
is.
It's very,
A lot of it
you know
is.
what though? I have to just say this. I know you'll agree with me. The whole business about how the lawyers always go back in chambers and the judge just tells them what's going to happen and makes a ruling, that does not
No,
happen.
that doesn't happen. We
But
don't do the walk and talk through the hallway. We always have a and, I have never seen so many judges throw out cases as I do.
oh, right.
But
Right,
yeah, but
exactly.
it's
Yep, that they
really
don't
real.
unfortunately have that kind
Yeah,
of
and
yeah.
just really have their hearts in the right place, and I don't know if you knew that she did shortly after, she started working with the untested rape kits, she did an episode that was about untested rape kits. Um, yeah,
I've seen
yeah,
it,
so, the court and
and that's before I knew
yeah, and
you.
that's of course and of course, about I Am Evidence, the movie, that documentary
Right.
that won an Oscar, won an Emmy, and so but yeah, that's been a very important aspect, but I have to tell you, we probably have now um, close to or maybe over 250 convictions, and that represents many more survivors because many of them are serial offenders. And one of the most astounding statistics that we have that still holds true today, and people say, "Well, why are you still working on this 15 years later?" Because that's how long it takes, and that's we have to investigate. We have to make sure that the forensics are right. We have to, we had to raise the money. That took us a couple of years just to do that. And we have a
Mhm.
victim notification policy that we established with Joyful Heart. For we worked on that for 9 months about just how to approach someone when something like this has happened. And so a lot of it took time. The investigators manual that my investigators did, and then I started traveling all over the country talking about this, and usually usually victim advocates would bring me in. Sometimes the DA's office, sometimes police departments where I talk about this. We became the national model, and we're very proud of that. And my thing is, I didn't want anybody to have to go through what we went through. No one should have to spend years and
Right.
years and years raising money and doing policies. And we're like, here, take our information, use it as you see fit.
Mhm.
You don't have to spend the time like we had to do and reinvent the wheel. So, but one of the most astounding things about this, Karen, is that, and you know this, we discovered that we had over 830 serial rapists just in our project. And we didn't know who they
Oh
all,
my
yeah, over
gosh.
830 just in one city, in one county, in one state. And we also know that, um, except for there were 10 states in the United States that weren't affected by our project. In other words, there were 40 states in the United States, 40, including Michigan, 39 plus Michigan, that had hits and were connected to our project through the CODIS work that we did. And I think another thing that I try to educate people on, and as well, these CODIS hits don't just help us solve sexual assaults. They help us solve murders and carjackings and auto theft and all kinds of
Oh, but you know what else they do, Kim? They also exonerate
yes,
people,
we had a case like that.
and
Yeah,
that's very
yeah.
important that, someone's been convicted as an any crime, but sexual assault, and then you find DNA evidence, and it actually shows that the person's not guilty.
So we are now doing forensic genetic genealogy, and without going through everything, basically, we have a company that we work with who creates genetic profiles. It's a very long, a very very expensive process. Um, and as a result of the work, and I'll just say very quickly that if you get an ancestry.com and you want to find out about your ancestors, that's a private, and any results that come from that are private. But if you want to go further and go to some of the public databases, which really opens up into millions of people, then you can go through some of them. But those are public, and those are law enforcement can have access to those. And so that's what happens. You have all these profiles, and so it's a very long process. But I just say it to say, if you do it privately, no one can look at your profiles. But you upload it publicly, then law enforcement can look at those. But anyway, so we used this company Parabon, who were able to, after 3 years, they were able to find that this rape could have happened to 5 cousins. And these were a series of schoolgirl rapes. Girls, I say girls because they weren't women yet, from 13 to 17 who have been all raped, walking to school and walking home from school. And so they did a profile. 4 of them, and they gave us all this information, lived down south, and they were not in Detroit at the time. One of them was in Detroit. And so that turned out to be he was surveilled, and a buccal swab was taken from him, and he was a match. And so he was the one that raped these young girls. And so we put the case together. He took a plea, doing a lot of time in prison in the Michigan Department of Corrections. But there was a person in prison who had been convicted of one of these schoolgirl rapes. And we were able,
Wow.
Terrence Calhoun was his name. We were able to exonerate him as a result
And
of our work.
he maintained his innocence
Mhm.
and throughout the trial
Yep.
and the
Yep.
conviction?
So this work, as you said, also can exonerate people. Also, so that's critically important. And I said that from the very beginning.
Yeah, and actually we have a segment on case files, and the one I'm gonna talk about today, is has to do with absolutely the scenario where years later there's a match, and they find somebody. I want to wrap up by asking a question that we're asking to every guest. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions. But the first question I'd like to ask is, what's one thing you think, even though you've been a public servant for how many years, Kym?
Oh gosh, 30,
30
maybe
years,
30.
and sometimes in a very, very public way. What's one thing you think that most people don't know about you?
Um, Gosh, that's a good question. Because sometimes you think people don't really know you, but
That's
I
right.
have a
When you're in the news a lot, people think they know you,
yeah,
but they don't really
I
know
have
you.
a really good sense of humor. Um, there are other causes and beliefs that I believe in. I have a daughter with sickle cell disease, and I'm on that board. I care very much about young figure skaters, and I work with them.
Mhm,
I'm on,
mhm.
of course, some professional boards as well. Joyful Heart, I've already talked about, but there are a number of causes and issues. And um, I also have adopted children, which I think is important, and that I adopted from the Michigan foster care system. Not without challenges sometimes, but I believe my
Mhm.
dad says, "Well, why did you have to adopt them?" I said, "Because Michigan at any given time has over 14,000 kids that need homes, and I
That's
wanted to
right.
be a part of
Mhm.
that." But there's just a lot of layers that to all people, and me included. We have interests and goals and disappointments and highlights that we want to talk about. I'm very close to my dad, who is 97. Lost my mother when I was 17. And so it's just been an interesting life, and a lot of
Mhm.
challenges. And this job is very taxing and very stressful if you do it right. Um,
Exactly.
and
Takes a lot of courage to do it right
yeah,
too.
it
What
does.
what it took for you to bring all those cases to light, that's really
It's
courage.
very, very hard. And you have people, get behind their keyboards, and you haven't charged the case because they can't prove it in court.
Right.
And to me, we don't try, as we know some of our colleagues across the state will charge any case that the police bring to them. We don't
Mhm.
do that. You don't do that. And in fact, we only charge about 2/3 of the cases that are brought to us because we have to believe that we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that sounds so trite and so Pollyannish, but I believe that. And um,
Well, you also have to make tough decisions about how to use
yep, that's
resources,
hard too.
right?
So there's many
Mhm.
aspects:
Yeah.
dealing with other public officials, dealing with your funders, all of that. And then dealing with your constituents as well, which are for the most part are overwhelmingly positive and wonderful.
Okay, so I do wanna say on a lighthearted note, the one thing that, I know about you that I share as well is we're both big, like, fans of the Marvel
Oh yeah,
franchise.
huge, huge, huge.
Which
And
fans,
I didn't
we
want to
kinda
watch.
found that out by
Yeah,
accident.
I didn't want to watch it. One of my twins said, "Come on, mom." She said, "Come on, mom, and just watch one movie with." And then literally 28 movies later.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
movies,
yeah.
but I don't miss them. I don't miss them. Okay, last question. Looking back on your entire career so far, um, do you have one instance of a choice you made that you wish you had chosen something different, and why?
Um, oh gosh, there are two things actually. One is, and there's nothing controversial about this. One is I didn't seize on my opportunities to study abroad when I was in school.
Oh,
I went to Michigan undergrad. I'm a huge Wolverine fan. Went to Michigan undergrad and went to Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame Law School. And they had a program there where you could take your second year and study your law school career in England. And I don't know why I
mhm.
didn't do it, but I didn't. As a result of not, one of my biggest regrets. And as a result of that, and I think my kids are finally believing me. I said, when I retire, the first thing I'm going to do is move to Europe for a year and
I
live
know,
there.
you've told me this.
Yeah,
This is so
yeah.
exciting. I'm gonna live vicariously
And I
through
think they
you.
believe me now. And the second thing is, I didn't work. I had the opportunity to work in Washington as a page, and I didn't do that either. And I don't know why. I'm a huge, Watergate, obsessed with Watergate and some other
Mm.
political scandals, and something that from a very young age. And that's something I should have done. So those are my two biggest regrets. I guess that's pretty good. If those are your two,
This is pretty good.
those are your
I
two major
agree, I
regrets.
agree. You know, I could talk to you for hours. In fact, we have talked for hours, and I would say, first, thank you, Kim Worthy, for everything you've done for the people of the state of Michigan and everything you've done for victims and everything you've done for people like me, because you are trailblazer. Blazer doesn't really cover it. Those It's challenging to be a woman in law enforcement and leadership, and you've absolutely provided me with such a great path and support doing that. Um, so thank you, and also just thank you for being our first guest, and thank you for everything you've done. And I know what you're going to do for the state.
My pleasure.
Now we're going to move on to a case files segment, which we'll be doing every episode. And this will be a segment that focuses on an actual specific case that relates to the topic of our episode. Today's case is the case of the defendant who was charged and convicted, Kurt Rellemont. He is in his 50s, and this was a case that we prosecuted, and he was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison for raping two women more than 2 decades ago. And the interesting part about this case is it went unsolved for years and years and years and years, and only through DNA science and technology were we able to identify the suspect and bring justice for these two victims. This involved a crime that took place in 1999 and 2000 at two separate golf courses. He was only charged in 2023 after investigators used advanced genetic genealogy testing to match his DNA to the assaults, and the victims had evidence taken in the same way we just discussed with rape kits, and it sat there because there was no suspect. But through cutting edge investigative tools and analyzing the DNA profiles through the genealogy databases, he's been convicted. And it really is a victory for justice and for the resilience of survivors. It creates a lot of public trust. And it also shows that prosecutors, law enforcement everywhere, we're going to do whatever we have to do to bring justice to victims. And sometimes it's delayed. But in this case, we were able to do that. And we were able to do that through the databases that people submit their DNA. You know, a lot of us have sent our DNA into these websites, and we pay a fee, and it comes back, and they tell us who we might be related to. And people, they like to do this. A lot of people give these testing kits as gifts. Um, I was always under the impression that first of all, I would never do that because I don't want my DNA out there. But the Kurt Relma case really showed us that even if you never get your DNA tested, you're still not clear from having your DNA lead something to you. And in this case, the suspect and defendant never submitted his DNA to one of these websites. However, a distant cousin had. And so using that DNA and matching it to these victims, one was in Pennsylvania, one was in Michigan, they were able to narrow down on this suspect. It was him, or he had brothers at the time. And then through using evidence collected on a coffee cup that he left somewhere, and that match, we were able to charge and prosecute and convict him. And I think, there's a lot of interest in the true crime genre. And I too sometimes find that really interesting. It's a little bit like my day job, but it is interesting. But there's a reason for it, and it's not just entertainment. I hope that this case serves, and also the episode today helps victims out there who are afraid to come forward, or victims who have come forward, um, to know that we are going to keep trying, and the people doing this work are doing it for all the right reasons, and that is we want to get it right and we want to bring justice to victims.